For decades, these files were sealed away, locked inside Soviet archives, never meant to be seen. They don't tell heroic stories. They document what power tried to hide. This story is reconstructed from classified Soviet records, a chain of events the system quietly erased. Welcome to Forbidden Stories from Soviet.
The Black Widow of the Kremlin. The Secret Vendetta of Margarita Volskaya Part 1. The Regal Walk to the Abyss, August 1979. Moscow. The bowels of Lefortovo prison. In the corridors, painted a sickly, institutional state green, there is a silence so profound it makes the ears ring with the ghosts of the millions who have passed through this concrete throat. This silence is not merely an absence of sound, it is a pressurized weight, the accumulated dread of decades. Suddenly, the silence is punctured. Not by the familiar, heavy scuffing of shackles or the dull thud of a guard's boot, but by the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of a woman's high heels against the cold cement. It is a sound of defiance. A sound of elegance in a place designed to grind elegance into dust. A woman is being led down the corridor toward the execution chamber. She is 47 years old. Even in her shapeless prison drab, stripped of the French cosmetics and silk scarves that were once her armor, she looks like a queen. Her hair, once as black as a raven's wing, is now streaked with silver at the temples, but it is pulled back with the same poise she displayed at Kremlin galas. The guards, young conscripts, boys who were barely born when she began her hunt, refuse to look her in the eye. They aren't avoiding her gaze out of shame, they are afraid. They fear the dark, hypnotic power that still lives in her amber eyes, the same power that sent 8 of the Soviet Union's most powerful men to their graves. She is being taken to the cell of the final hour. This is an unprecedented event in the history of Soviet justice. In the USSR, the death penalty was almost never applied to women. Only 3 names stand in that grim roll call. Tonka the machine gunner, the butcher of the Lokot Republic Bela Borodkina, the Iron Bella of the Southern Mafia, and her, Margarita Volskaya. Her name has been meticulously bleached from every official record. The newspapers never mention her trial. The archives of the Politburo were purged of her existence. She was the woman who made the party elite, men used to commanding nations, crawl on their knees and beg for a mercy she never intended to grant. The senior investigator who handled her case, a man who had stared down mass murderers and foreign spies, would later write in his secret memoirs. Volskaya was not a criminal. She was a biological weapon. She was a virus that penetrated the organism of the state and dismantled it from the inside. Organ by organ. Soul by soul. As she reaches the heavy steel door, the sound of the rifle bolts racking back echoes in the small room. Margarita doesn't weep. She doesn't pray. She gives a small, thin smile that holds more cruelty than the weapons pointed at her chest. "I have taken my payment," she whispers, her voice steady and melodious. "For my mother. For my father. And for the childhood you turned into a graveyard." Who was she? Was she a genius adventuress, a Soviet Sonka the Golden Hand? Or was she a cold-blooded reaper who used the beds of the elite as an executioner's block? Today, we open a folder marked Sovovesheno Sekretno, Top Secret. For 50 years, it has gathered dust in the KGB vaults. This is the story of the Black Widow of the CPSU. Part 2. The fall from the house on the embankment. To understand the Black Widow, one must travel back to 1937, the year the air in Moscow smelled of fear and frozen diesel. Margarita was 5 years old. At that time, she lived in paradise. Paradise had an address. Serafimovicha Street, House 2, the legendary house on the embankment. It was a fortress of luxury for the high-ranking elite. Her father, Alexander Volsky, was a titan in the commissariat of heavy industry. He was a true believer, a hero of the Civil War with a chest full of medals and a heart filled with the fire of the revolution. Her mother was a star of the theatre, a woman who smelled of Parisian perfumes and lived in a world of silk and lace. Little Margot grew up as the princess of the Soviet Empire. She ate cakes from silver spoons while watching the Kremlin stars glow from her window. She believed that the world was a safe, golden place. She didn't know that 1937 was a machine designed to grind even the most loyal children of October into blood and bone. The end of paradise arrived in the middle of a Tuesday night. Margot was awakened by the sound of boots, not the rhythmic thumping of a parade, but the frantic, violent crashing of men in a hurry. She ran into the hallway in her nightgown and saw two men in black leather coats twisting her father's arms behind his back. Her father, the man who could command 10,000 workers with a word, looked small and confused. They ripped the insignia from his collar. "It's a mistake," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Call Comrade Orjanakidze. He knows me. This is a misunderstanding." The senior Chekist gave a wet, ugly chuckle and slammed the butt of his pistol into Volsky's stomach. As her father crumpled to the floor, her mother threw herself at the feet of the guards, weeping, begging, her silk nightgown dragging in the mud brought in by their boots. They kicked her aside like a broken doll. Margot stood in the corner, her 5-year-old eyes memorizing every detail. She saw the gaze of the lead officer as he looked at her mother. It wasn't the look of a defender of the law. It was the look of a predator watching a wounded animal. He reached out and snatched a string of pearls from her mother's neck, a gift from her father. He stuffed it into his pocket with a smirk. "Beautiful woman," he said to his partner. "A shame shall rot in the camp so fast. But we'll have a little conversation with her first in the basement." Her father was shot 14 days later. Her mother survived for a year in a transit camp near Karagandar, her heart finally giving out under the weight of the interrogations. For Margarita, a different kind of hell began. The special orphanage for the children of the enemies of the people. Imagine a 5-year-old girl, used to silver spoons, suddenly finding herself in a barracks that reeked of chlorine, urine, and rotten cabbage soup. A place where you were no longer a child, but a number. A place where teachers struck your fingers with iron rulers if you ever mentioned your parents. "Your parents are traitors," they drummed into her head every morning. "You are the spawn of filth. You must spend your life atoning for their sins." It was there, in the freezing cold of a Ryazan orphanage, that little Rita died. In her place, Margarita was born. She learned early that tears were a currency that bought nothing but more pain. She learned to hide her bread. She learned to lie with a smile. But most importantly, she learned to hate. She didn't hate a specific leader, she hated the entire system. The fat, comfortable officials who had moved into her parents' apartment, who wore stolen pearls, and who spoke of communist morality while practicing the dark arts of the dungeon. By the time she was 16, Margarita had blossomed into a beauty that was both breathtaking and terrifying. She had hair as black as the vulgar at midnight, skin like pale porcelain, and eyes the color of dark, poison honey. When she looked at a man, he didn't see a girl, he saw a destiny. In 1948, she escaped the orphanage and made her way to Moscow. She had no money, no home, and no documents. She had only one goal: to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her, and to punish every man who had held the door open for the Reaper. Part 3. The Forged Wolf and the Minister's Downfall. Moscow in the late 1940s was a city of winners draped in the shadows of the losers. It was a place where the air tasted of victory parades and cheap Makorka tobacco, where the streets were filled with officers whose chests groaned under the weight of medals, and where the elite dined on sturgeon while the commoners stood in 4-hour lines for bread. Margarita Volskaya watched this world from the gutters, but she watched it with the cold, analytical gaze of a strategist. She was no longer a child. She was a survivor who had realized that in the Soviet Union, a person was only as real as the paper they carried in their pocket. She began her ascent in the damp, lightless cellar of a master engraver, an old Jewish craftsman in the Sukharevka district who had survived the purges by making himself indispensable to the criminal underworld. For the price of a gold ring she had stolen from a distracted vendor, he gave her a new life. He handed her a clean internal passport, free of the enemies of the people mark. With a few strokes of his specialized pens, little Rita the orphan was erased. In her place stood Margarita Grigorievna Volskaya, a war refugee from Leningrad with a noble, but safely Sovietized, background. It was a masterpiece of forgery, a shield made of ink and stamp wax. She understood that the greatest weakness of the Soviet man in power was his profound, unspoken loneliness. These men lived in a world of rigid protocols, of terrifying party meetings, and of wives who had become as grey and predictable as the state-run newspapers. They were kings in their offices but prisoners in their lives. Margarita decided to become their oxygen, and their poison. In 1953, the year Stalin's death sent a tremor of panic and hope through the empire. Margarita identified her first major target: Nikolai Petrovich Ignatiev. He was the deputy minister of light industry, a 50-year-old bear of a man with a receding hairline and a chest full of administrative awards. He was a man who believed he was untouchable. He had the Tverskaya apartment, the silver forest atcha, and a black Volga with a private driver. Margarita hunted him in Sochi, at the Council of Ministers Sanatorium. She had forged her own travel voucher, a gift for her supposed hard work in the archives. She didn't approach him. She simply walked past him on the sun-drenched embankment, wearing a white silk dress and holding a book of forbidden poetry. She was a vision of inaccessible grace. Ignatiev, used to women who threw themselves at his rank, was instantly ensnared by her indifference. The seduction was a psychological operation. Within a month, Ignatiev was a man possessed. Margarita didn't just sleep with him, she dismantled his reality. In the bedroom, she was a demanding, cruel mistress who forced the high-ranking official to crawl on his knees, shattering his dignity to rebuild it in her own image. He became addicted to the shame she provided. He was willing to do anything to keep her, even risk the wrath of the party. Margarita convinced him to marry her illegally. She played on his ego, telling him that a man of his stature shouldn't be held back by a boring, old wife. Using his connections in the militia and the ZAG's registry office, Ignatiev organized a fraudulent marriage. He lost his original passport and received a clean one, free of his previous marriage stamp. Margarita Volskaya became Margarita Ignatieva. She moved into his life like a parasite, gaining access to his safe, his ledgers, and his most dangerous secrets. For 6 months, she drained him. She forced him to buy her diamonds with embezzled state funds. She made him sign over dacha plots to distant relatives who were merely her own forged identities. But while he basked in the glow of his late-life passion, Margarita was busy in the middle of the night, photographing the documents in his briefcase. She documented the bribes, the falsified production reports, and the lists of gifts he had sent to higher-ups. When she had enough, she struck. She vanished on a Tuesday morning, taking the diamonds, the cash, and the ledger of his crimes. She left a single note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for the fairy tale, Collier. But the Reaper is at the door. I've sent the original ledger to the OBG's Anti-Corruption Department. Enjoy the trial." It was a bluff. She hadn't sent anything yet, but Ignatiev didn't know that. He looked at his empty safe and his ruined career. He saw the cold walls of a gulag cell waiting for him. That evening, the deputy minister locked himself in his study at the dacha and put his service pistol in his mouth. Margarita learned of his sudden heart attack from a tiny obituary in Pravda, while she was already on a train to Kiev. The first cross was marked in her black notebook. The hunt was no longer a dream. It was a career. Part 4. The Kiev Purgatory and the screams of the past. The train from Moscow to Kiev rattled through the night, a rhythmic, iron heartbeat that matched the cold pulse in Margarita's chest. She lay in her luxury sleeper compartment, the string of pearls she had taken from Ignatiev's safe cooling her skin. She was no longer the minister's wife. She was Rita Kovalchuk, a modest, soft-spoken librarian with a tragic past. Her target in Kiev was a man who occupied a much darker circle of her memory, Vladimir Sergeyevich Kortsevsky. In 1954, Kortsevsky was a respected figure in the Ukrainian capital. He was the head of the cultural administration, a connoisseur of the opera who donated rare books to the state and was often seen in the front row of the ballet, nodding appreciatively to the music. But Margarita didn't see the man of culture. She saw the ghost of 1937. She remembered the Lubyanka interrogation room where, as a 5-year-old, she had been forced to watch this man, then a lean, predatory NKVD major, strike her mother across the face with a leather glove. She remembered his fish-like eyes as he laughed while her mother shrieked. It was Kortsevsky who had signed her father's death warrant. It was Kortsevsky who had torn the pearls from her mother's neck. Margarita moved to Kiev during the height of the chestnut blossom season. She took a job at the Academy of Sciences library, blending into the background of dust and ink. She didn't use the vamp persona she had used on Ignatiev. For Kortsevsky, she became a Turgenev girl, quiet, intellectual, and fragile. She began appearing at the opera house during intermissions, always alone, always holding a book of verse. The meeting was inevitable. Kortsevsky, who fancied himself a mentor to young, pure talent, noticed the crying girl during a performance of Eugene Onegin. He approached her with the practiced charm of an aging predator. "Music should bring joy, not tears, my dear," he said, offering a silk handkerchief. Margarita looked up, her amber eyes wide with a carefully manufactured innocence. "It's not the music, Vladimir Sergeyevich," she whispered, using his name to flatter him. "It's the beauty. It makes the world seem so cruel by comparison." Korczewski was enchanted. Within months, he had installed her in his lavish apartment on Kreszczadek Street, a home filled with antiques and paintings confiscated from the very people he had sent to the execution blocks. This was where the gaslighting began. Margarita didn't want to just kill him, she wanted to drive him into the same madness her mother had suffered. At night, while he slept the heavy sleep of the self-righteous, she would go to work. She began moving small objects. He would leave his glasses on the nightstand and find them in the refrigerator. He would lock the windows and wake up to find them swinging open in the wind. Then came the sounds. She used the old, creaky pipes of the Stalin-era building to her advantage. She would hide small, battery-operated tape recorders, a rare trophy from a foreign diplomat, in the vents. At 3 a.m., the hour of the secret police raids, the apartment would fill with the faint, ghostly sound of a typewriter, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of an interrogation transcript being written. Sometimes, it was the sound of a woman weeping in the next room. "Rita, do you hear that?" Korczewski would hiss, his face pale and sweating in the moonlight. "Hear what, Volodya?" She would reply, her voice smooth as honey. "The city is silent. You're just tired. Perhaps the past is finally catching up with your nerves." He began to drink. The man of culture became a trembling wreck who was afraid of his own shadow. The final stroke came on the anniversary of her father's execution. Korczewski, in a fit of drunken sentimentality and fearing he was losing his mind, decided to gift her something special to prove his love. He opened his secret wall safe and pulled out a velvet box. Inside lay the pearls. Her mother's pearls. The gold clasp in the shape of a rose was unmistakable. Margarita's heart turned into a block of dry ice. She allowed him to drape the pearls around her neck. He stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Do you like them, Rita?" he asked, his voice slurred. Margarita turned to face him. The mask fell away. Her eyes became two pits of ancient, unvarnished hate. "I love them, Major," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "My mother loved them, too. Before you knocked her teeth out in room 402. Before you sent her to rot in Karagandar while you stole her life." Korczewski's face turned a sickening shade of grey. He tried to speak, but his throat seized. The shock hit his weak heart like a sledgehammer. He collapsed onto the Persian rug, clutching his chest, gasping for air. He reached for the bottle of nitroglycerine on the side table. Margarita reached it first. She picked up the bottle, looked him in the eye, and slowly poured the white pills onto the floor. She crushed them beneath her high heel with a deliberate, crunching sound that was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. "Die slowly, Volodya," she whispered. "The way my father did. The way the orphans you made did." She sat in his favorite armchair and watched him for 20 minutes. She watched the light fade from his fish-like eyes until there was nothing left but a cold, heavy silence. She didn't leave immediately. She opened his safe, took his gold coins, his lists of confiscated properties, and his hidden folders of MVD secrets. Before she walked out into the Kiev night, she took her lipstick and wrote a single word on the hallway mirror. Second. The train to Leningrad was already waiting. Part 5. The Leningrad Requiem and the poisoned air. Leningrad in the autumn of 1955 was a city of ghosts and shadows, built upon the bones of millions and draped in a permanent, icy mist that drifted off the Gulf of Finland. The air smelled of damp granite, wet wool, and the faint, persistent scent of wood smoke from the stoves of the communal apartments. Margarita Volskaya stood on the Lieutenant Schmidt embankment, her collar of silver fox fur pulled tight against the wind. She looked at the dark, churning waters of the Neva and felt a sense of homecoming. It was here, in the city of poets and revolutionaries, that her father's brother, a brilliant, sensitive lyricist, had been arrested for formalism and sent to rot in the Solovki camps. In her purse, she carried a passport for Inga Berg, a Baltic German intellectual, a restorer of rare books, and a woman of icy, inaccessible sophistication. This was the mask she had chosen for her third target, Arkady Pavlovich Severin. Severin was the secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee for Ideology. He was the guardian of the Soviet mind, a man whose signature decided which books were printed and which poets were silenced. In the late 1940s, he had been the architect of the purges that decimated the Leningrad intelligentsia. He was a vocal moralist, a man who thundered from the podium against the vile influence of Western jazz, short skirts, and decadent behavior. But Margarita knew that those who shout the loudest about morality often hide the deepest filth in their basements. She realized that Severin was too guarded, too paranoid to be approached directly. To destroy the lion, she would first have to break his cub. His son, Yuri Severin, was a 23-year-old golden youth. He was a student at the Faculty of Philology who had never opened a textbook. He spent his father's money on American cigarettes, silk ties from the black market, and bone music, forbidden Western records pressed onto discarded X-ray films. He was weak, bored, and hungry for a danger he didn't understand. Margarita, as Inga Berg, found him in an underground jazz club hidden in the cellar of a dilapidated building on the Petrograd side. She sat alone in the corner, smoking a long cigarette in a silver holder, her amber eyes reflecting the dim, flickering candlelight. Yuri, used to the giggling attention of party daughters, was transfixed. "Why do you look so bored, Inga?" he asked, leaning over her table, smelling of expensive cognac. "I'm not bored, Yuri," she replied in a low, melodious voice with a faint, manufactured accent. "I am merely watching the death of an empire in your face. It's quite fascinating." Within a week, Yuri was a slave. She didn't sleep with him, she became his dealer of forbidden fruit. She took him to the rooftops of the city, read him the banned verses of Gumilev under the moonlight, and spoke of a world where the party didn't exist. She became his drug, more potent than the alcohol he consumed. And when his addiction to her was absolute, she introduced a new element: morphine. "It will expand your consciousness, Yuri," she whispered, her hand steady as she administered the injection in his father's private library while the old man was away at a plenum. "You will see the world as the great poets did. You will finally be free of your father's grey shadow." She systematically poisoned Yuri's mind against Arkady Pavlovich. She whispered that the old man was jealous of his youth, that he planned to send him to a labor battalion in Siberia to correct him, and that the ideology secretary was secretly obsessed with Inga himself. The tragedy reached its climax during the November holidays. The city was a sea of red banners, but at the Severin dacha in Komarovo, the air was thick with the scent of an impending execution. Margarita had convinced Yuri that his father had called the psychiatric guards to take him away that night. "I won't let them take you, Yuri," she whispered, handing him a vial of high-potency psychotropic drugs she had stolen from a medical warehouse. "We will have a farewell dinner. Just the three of us. And then we will leave together." The dinner was a masterpiece of Shakespearean cruelty. Margarita had drugged both men. Yuri received a lethal dose of morphine hidden in his wine. Arkady Pavlovich received a compound that induced violent hallucinations and unmasked aggression. As the drugs took hold, Yuri collapsed into his plate, his heart failing under the chemical weight. Arkady Pavlovich, his mind a theatre of demons, began to scream about enemies of the people and saboteurs. Margarita calmly picked up the telephone and dialed the local militia station, leaving the receiver off the hook so the duty officer could hear the ideology secretary's incoherent, murderous rants. "I'll kill you, you traitorous filth. I'll purge you all." Before the militia arrived, Margarita took the old man's service pistol, pressed his finger onto the trigger, and fired a single shot into the ceiling. She wiped her fingerprints, placed a forged suicide note in Yuri's pocket, claiming his father was a drug addict who had forced him into a suicide pact, and vanished into the Leningrad fog. When the authorities burst in, they found the corpse of the son and the man of ideology babbling in a corner, clutching a smoking gun. The scandal was buried, of course. Severin was never put on trial. He was quietly moved to a special psychiatric facility under KGB control, where he spent the rest of his life screaming at the walls. In the dust of the dacha's hallway, written in red lipstick on a portrait of the party leadership, was the word. Third. Part 6. The foundry of greed and the Ural metamorphosis. The winter of 1956 arrived with a ferocity that turned the Ural Mountains into a landscape of jagged, white iron. Sverdlovsk, the industrial heart of the Soviet Union, was a city of smoke, soot, and the relentless, subterranean roar of the defense plants. Here, the air tasted of sulfur and big, dirty money. This was the kingdom of Boris Zakharovich Golov, the director of the Uralmash Combine, a hero of socialist labor and a man known as the Iron Bear. Golov was a creature of pure, unadulterated greed. In 1937, he had been a simple engineer who climbed to the director's chair by writing denunciations of his three superiors. One of them was Margarita's father, who had come to the Urals on an inspection tour and refused to overlook Golov's logistical discrepancies. Unlike her previous targets, Golov could not be seduced. He was an impotent misogynist who viewed women as domestic appliances or clutter. He had no children to corrupt and no romantic soul to break. His only love was the technical gold and platinum that flowed through his secret foundry, metal he stole by the ton and hid in the sub-basements of his factory. Margarita arrived in Sverdlovsk as Valentina Ostrowskaya, a senior auditor from the Gokran, the state repository of valuables, carrying a mandate signed with a forged but perfect signature of Nikita Khrushchev. She appeared in Gorlov's office like a sudden, freezing wind. "The party knows about the platinum, Boris Zakharovich," she said, tossing her leather briefcase onto his mahogany desk. "Moscow is conducting an audit, and your head is currently on the block." Gorlov blanched. His hand twitched toward the alarm button under his desk. "I wouldn't," Margarita said, calmly lighting a cigarette. "I am not here to arrest you. I am here to offer you an exit. There is a shadow syndicate within the Central Committee. We know you have enough metal to buy a small country. We can move it to Zurich for you, and we can organize a state-authorized diplomatic post in Western Europe from which you will never return. Or, I can call the KGB Spetsnaz currently waiting at the hotel. The choice is yours." It was a brilliant, high-stakes gamble. Margarita played on his two greatest impulses: his paralyzing fear of the dungeon and his bottomless greed for a life of luxury in the West. Gorlov, who believed he was the smartest man in the Urals, fell into the trap because he wanted to believe. He was tired of hiding his wealth in the dirt. The laundry operation was scheduled for the dead of night. Margarita had convinced Gorlov to bring his entire stash of stolen bullion to Foundry Shop 4, a massive, echoing cathedral of fire and steel. The shop was empty, save for the hum of the cooling systems and the white-hot glow of the dormant crucibles. Gorlov arrived alone, his breath pluming in the cold air, pushing a heavy industrial trolley laden with wooden crates. He looked around nervously for the transport team. "Where are your men, Valentina?" he hissed, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "There are no men, Boris," Margarita replied, stepping out from the shadows of a massive hydraulic press. She was dressed in workers' coveralls, her hair hidden under a cap. She held up a yellowed piece of paper. "I have the 1937 report right here. Engineer Volsky is a saboteur. Do you recognize the handwriting?" Gorlov froze. In the flickering red light of the furnaces, he finally saw the face of the man he had murdered reflected in the eyes of the woman before him. You're his brat," he whispered, a guttural sound of realization. "I'll kill you. I'll throw you into the vat and no one will ever find a hair of your head." He lunged at her with the strength of a cornered beast. Margarita was faster. She didn't retreat, she reached for the controls of the overhead crane. As Gorlov charged, she swung the heavy iron hook, catching him in the chest and knocking him backward toward the edge of the viewing platform, 30 feet above the molten slag. He dangled over the abyss, his fingers clawing at the safety railing. "Help me. I'll give you the gold. I'll give you the diamonds. I have millions." "I don't want your gold, Boris," Margarita said, standing over him, her boot pressing down on his knuckles. "It's tainted. It's heavy with the blood of my father. You loved this metal so much? Then you shall become a part of it." She kicked the first crate of bullion into the air. The gold bars rained down into the molten steel with a series of spectacular, white-hot splashes. Then, she leaned down, her face inches from his. "The audit is over, Bear. Jump." Fear of the bullet she now held to his forehead was the final push. Gorlov's grip failed. He fell silently, a brief flash of flame in the darkness of the crucible marking the end of the Ural Master. He didn't even have a grave, he became a literal part of the next batch of armor plating for Soviet tanks. Margarita left the factory with a small, heavy velvet bag found in Gorlov's personal safe, raw diamonds stolen from the Yakut mines, worth more than the gold she had burned. 2 days later, investigator Lev Gromov arrived in Sverdlovsk. He stood on the viewing platform, looking at the cooling slag. He found a spent shell casing from a German Walther. The librarian, Gromov whispered to his adjutant, his face a mask of weary realization. "She's not just a thief. She's a reaper. And she's heading south." Part 7. The Caucasian Gambit and the execution of the false King Tbilisi in the spring of 1957 was a world away from the soot-choked foundries of the Urals. It was a city that breathed through the scent of blooming magnolias, roasting lamb, and the ancient, heavy dust of the Silk Road. Here, the Soviet laws were merely suggestions, often drowned out by the louder traditions of blood feuds, hospitality, and the shadow economy. In the sunlight of Georgia, The golden nomenclatura didn't just steal, they lived like royalty. Margarita arrived as Princess Neni-Chavchavadze, a fake repatriate from Paris, the daughter of an exiled noble family whom the state had magnanimously allowed to return. It was a role that required all of her theatrical upbringing. She wore her mother's pearls with a newfound arrogance, shielded her eyes behind dark Italian sunglasses, and spoke a Russian flavor with a subtle, aristocratic French lilt. Her target was Givy Andronikov, known in the criminal underworld as Givy the Mad. Officially, he was a retired veteran of the Great Patriotic War. In reality, he was a thief-in-law, a vor v zakwan, and the undisputed king of the Tbilisi black market. He controlled the tangerine plantations, the underground textile factories, and the vast obshak, the criminal treasury of the entire Caucasus. But Margarita knew the secret that Givy had spent millions to bury. In 1938, he hadn't been a criminal, he had been Senior Lieutenant Grigory Andronikov of the NKVD. He was the commander of the 4th Block at the Karagandar transit camp. He was the man who had invented the ice bath, a torture where women were forced to stand naked in freezing water until their lungs turned to liquid. It was Givy who had stood over her mother, laughing, as the pneumonia that would kill her took hold. He had reinvented himself in the chaos of the post-war years, using stolen camp gold to buy a new identity and a throne in the criminal world. Margarita didn't seek a lover's embrace with Givy. She knew that a man like him viewed women as livestock. She sought him at the card table. Givy was a legendary gambler, a man who believed that luck was just another servant he had enslaved. Margarita began appearing at his underground casinos, playing with a cold, terrifying precision. She didn't just win, she humiliated his best cadella, card sharps. The invitation to his villa in Skeda arrived on a silver tray. The villa was a fortress of marble and vine-covered stone, guarded by men with submachine guns. Givy met her in a hall filled with looted church icons and fine Persian rugs. He was a mountain of a man, his face a landscape of scars, his fingers weighted with heavy gold rings. They say the princess plays like a demon, Givy rumbled, pouring a glass of dark Saparavi wine. They say you want my obshak. I don't play for paper, Givy, Margarita replied, her voice like a silken garrote. I play for the truth. If I win, I take the contents of your cellar. If I lose, I am yours to do with as you please. And I will add these to the pot. She emptied the velvet bag of Gorlov's diamonds onto the table. The raw stones caught the light of the chandelier, burning with a cold, celestial fire. Giv's greed, the same greed that had made him a torturer in Karlag, blinded him. Deal, he hissed. The game lasted 3 hours. It was a duel of psychological attrition. Givy cheated, using every trick of the criminal trade, but Margarita wasn't playing against his cards, she was playing against his past. In the final hand, Givy laid down a 4 of a kind, kings. He reached for the diamonds with a triumphant roar. Margarita didn't move. She laid down a straight flush. The room went silent. The guards shifted their weight, the sound of their leather holsters creaking in the stillness. Giv's face turned a bruised, violent purple. You cheated, you bitch. He roared, overturning the table. No one takes my money in my house. Kill her. The guards racked their bolts, but Margarita reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a yellowed, 1939 photograph she had stolen from Kortsevsky's files in Kiev. She threw it onto the floor. Before you shoot, Margarita said, her voice projecting with the power of a lead actress, look at your king. Look at him in his NKVD uniform. Look at him holding the hair of a dying woman in Karlag. He isn't a vor. He is a sucker, a pig in a wolf skin. He has been leading you while wearing the blood of your brothers on his soul. The criminal world has no sin greater than a ment, cop, pretending to be a thief. The thieves' code is the only law that matters in the underworld. One of the senior thieves, an old man with a face like a dried plum, picked up the photo. He looked at Givy, then at the image of the young NKVD officer. The scar on Giv's neck, the one he claimed was from a German bayonet, matched the one in the photo perfectly. The guards lowered their weapons, but they didn't put them away. They turned them toward Givy. It's a lie. Givy shrieked, backing toward the wall. She's a witch. Kill her. The old thief spat on Giv's boots. The princess is a guest. You are a mistake that has lived too long. Margarita picked up her diamonds and walked out onto the terrace. She didn't look back as the sounds of the people's court began inside, the wet thud of knives, the breaking of bones, and the high, shrill screams of a man who was finally learning the price of the ice bath. She found the entrance to the cellar. It was filled with sacks of currency, millions of rubles, stacks of American dollars, and boxes of gold jewelry. She took what she could carry in 2 heavy suitcases and set the rest on fire with a crate of industrial kerosene. As the villa burned behind her, lighting up the Georgian night like a second sun, Margarita drove away in Giver's own car. The 5th cross was marked. Part 8. The stalker in the shadows and the dynamite truce in tourist hotel in Tbilisi was a hive of whispers and watchful eyes. Margarita returned to her suite at 4 a.m., the adrenaline still coursing through her veins like liquid fire. She had the diamonds. She had the millions. She was the most successful ghost in the Soviet Union. But as she opened the door to her room, she felt a familiar, chilling sensation, the feeling of being watched. She didn't turn on the light. She reached for the small, snub-nosed revolver she had taken from Giver's desk. "Don't," a tired, gravelly voice said from the darkness of the corner armchair. "I've had a long flight, Margarita. I'm not in the mood for a shootout." A match flared. In the brief, flickering orange light, she saw the face of Lev Davidovich Gromov, the old wolf of the general procuracy. He looked exhausted, his suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was nursing a glass of warm cognac. On the table before him sat a Makarov pistol. "You've been busy, Princess," Gromov said, gesturing to the 2 suitcases of money. "Ignatiev, Kortsevsky, Severin, Gorlov, and now Givy. A cemetery of 5 men. You're a very efficient reaper." Margarita stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. "You're late, Lev. The show is over." "Is it?" Gromov stood up, his joints popping. He walked toward her, but he didn't raise his gun. He looked at the pearls around her neck. "I know who you are, Margot. I know about the house on the embankment. I know about the special orphanage. I've read your father's file. He was a good man. He didn't deserve 1937. Then why are you here?" She hissed. "To put the daughter of a hero in a cage while the real monsters sleep in the Kremlin?" Gromov looked at her with a profound, soul-weary pity. "Because I have a job to do. But I also have eyes. You've done the state a service by removing those leeches. But you've crossed a line. You're no longer just an avenger. You're a variable. And the system hates variables." Margarita slowly unbuttoned her silk robe. Gromov froze, his hand twitching toward his pistol. But he didn't see skin. He saw the gleam of metal and the dull grey of wax paper tubes. Wrapped around her waist was a belt of industrial dynamite, 8 sticks she had stolen from the Uralmash foundry. Her thumb was resting on a makeshift detonator. "I died when I was 5, Lev," she said, her voice steady and devoid of fear. "You can't kill a ghost. But I can take this entire floor with me. You have a wife in Moscow, don't you? And a daughter who plays the piano? Do you want them to receive a closed casket?" Gromov looked at the detonator, then at her honey-colored eyes. He saw the void she had described. He realized that she wasn't bluffing. She was a woman who had found her peace in the thought of her own annihilation. "You're a monster, Margot," Gromov whispered. "I am a mirror," she corrected him. "I am only what you and your masters made me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Gromov slowly holstered his weapon. "I'm going to go to the bathroom and wash my face," Gromov said, turning his back to her, an act of either immense courage or utter despair. "When I come out, this room will be empty. I will tell the local KGB that I lost you in the crowd. You have 10 minutes. After that, I will call in the interceptor plan." "Why?" she asked, surprised for the first time. "Because," Gromov said, looking at her one last time, "I want to see if you can reach the last one. The one who signed the decree for the orphanages. The one who is currently dying in a luxury ward in Konchevo, thinking he's a hero. If you can kill him, Margot, then maybe the ghosts of 1937 will finally let us all sleep." Margarita nodded. She didn't say thank you. She vanished through the balcony, moving across the roofs of Tbilisi with the grace of a black panther. She had the money, the diamonds, and the location of the 6th target. Gromov stood at the window, watching the stars over the Caucasus. He knew he had just committed treason. He knew he was being used as much as he was using her. But he also knew that the party gold, the secret billions hidden by the architects of the terror, was the only thing the Kremlin cared about. And Margarita was the only key that could open that vault. The final hunt was moving back to the heart of the empire. Moscow was waiting. Part 9. The Kremlin Mausoleum and the architect's agony. Moscow in December 1957 was a city of iron-grey snow and the suffocating scent of cheap diesel fumes. The thaw of Khrushchev was in full swing, but for Margarita Volskaya, the world remained frozen in the perpetual winter of 1937. The circle had finally closed. She had returned to the city that had devoured her parents, not as the 5-year-old princess of the house on the embankment, but as the angel of death, a woman who had systematically dismantled the lives of those who had built their careers on the blood of the innocent. Her final target was hidden behind the high brick walls of Konchevo, the Kremlin hospital, a closed medical facility for the Soviet gods. In a luxury suite on the top floor, guarded by a rotating shift of elite KGB officers, a man was dying. His name was Valery Ilyich Kogan, a general of state security and a man whose signature was a death sentence for thousands. In the 1930s, he had been the person of function for the NKVD, the architect of the system of special orphanages for the children of the enemies of the people. It was Kogan who had signed Decree No. 00486, the document that turned 5-year-old Rita into a nameless number in a Ryazani barracks. General Kogan was dying of stomach cancer, his body rotting from the inside as if his own malice had finally turned into a biological weapon. He was a difficult patient, paranoid, and cruel even in his final hours. He refused to let any but a few handpicked nurses administer his morphine. Margarita spent nearly all of the millions she had stolen in Tbilisi on a single, massive bribe to the hospital's chief physician. On a snowy Tuesday night, she entered the facility as Nurse Anna, a high-category specialist with a flawless and forged record. She walked past the KGB guards with her head held high, her white apron starched to a razor's edge, her mother's pearls hidden beneath her collar like a secret prayer. The suite smelled of antiseptic, expensive tobacco, and the cloying, sweet stench of decaying flesh. On the bed lay a creature that looked more like a mummy than a man, yellowed skin stretched tight over a skull, eyes sunken into deep, dark pits, hands like skeletal claws. But Kogan's gaze was still sharp, still filled with the predatory intelligence of the Great Purge. "You're new," Kogan rasped, his voice sounding like two pieces of rusted metal grinding together. "I am the last one, Valery Ilyich," Margarita replied softly, closing the door and clicking the lock. She walked to the bedside table and picked up a syringe. Kogan watched her, his fish-like eyes narrowing. "Time for the relief." "Not quite," Margarita said, leaning over him. She removed her glasses, allowing him to see her honey-colored eyes clearly for the first time. "Look at me, General. Look closely. Do you remember the house on the embankment? Do you remember Engineer Volsky? Do you remember the actress who begged for her daughter's life while you laughed?" Kogan froze. He had a phenomenal memory for the faces he had destroyed. It was his only hobby. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a surge of primal, animalistic fear. He tried to reach for the call button, but Margarita's hand was faster. She pinned his wrist to the bed with a strength that felt like a steel trap. "I have killed them all, Valery," she whispered. "Ignatiev, Kortsevsky, Severin, Gorlov, Andronikov. Your empire of fear has been liquidated. You are the last survivor of my father's murder." She held up the syringe. "This isn't morphine. It's a mixture of adrenaline and neurostimulants. It won't kill you. It will do the opposite. It will jumpstart your heart, clear your mind, and amplify your nervous system. You will feel every single cell of your cancer. You will feel the full weight of the pain you spent your life inflicting on others. You will die in absolute, screaming consciousness." Kogan's breath came in wet, jagged gasps. "What? What do you want?" "Money. Gold. I want the debt paid," she hissed. Suddenly, the door was not just opened, it was obliterated. Investigator Lev Gromov burst into the room, followed by 3 KGB operatives with drawn pistols. "Stop!" Gromov shouted, his face pale. "Margot, don't do it." Margarita didn't move. She held the syringe to Kogan's jugular vein. "One step closer, Lev, and I inject the air bubble. He dies before he can speak." Gromov raised his hands in a gesture of truce. "We don't want him, Margot. We want the codes. The accounts in Zurich. The party gold that Kogan hid during the transition. If he dies now, Billions of rubles belong to no one. The state needs that money. Margarita looked at Gromov, and a horrifying realization settled over her. The old wolf hadn't let her go into Tbilisi out of mercy. He had used her. He knew she was the only one who could bypass Kogan's paranoia. He had turned the daughter of a hero into a KGB hunting dog. "You're worse than they are," Margarita said, her voice trembling with the weight of the betrayal. "They were monsters, but you are a hypocrite." Kogan suddenly began to laugh, a bubbling, bloody sound. "Beautiful." The dying general croaked. "Chekists eating Chekists. Girl, listen to me." Margarita leaned down, the syringe still pressed to his neck. Kogan whispered into her ear, so softly that only she could hear. "I won't give it to them. I won't give it to the pigs in the Central Committee. Let it go to a ghost. Zurich. Bank Iwen. Vault 404. The key is the date you died. 1937. Kill me now." Kogan suddenly shrieked at the top of his lungs. "Kill me, girl. Don't let them take me." Gromov lunged forward. "Don't shoot the general." But Margarita was faster. With a single, fluid motion, she plunged the needle into Kogan's neck and emptied the contents. It wasn't the stimulant she had promised. It was a massive, lethal dose of pure potassium chloride. Kogan's heart didn't just stop at ruptured. His body arched off the bed in a final, violent convulsion, and then he fell back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, a mask of absolute, terrified silence. The architect of the orphanages was dead. The secret of the party gold was gone. Margarita was tackled to the floor, the butt of a Makarov pistol slamming into her temple. As the darkness rushed in, she felt a strange, ecstatic sense of peace. She had finished her mission. The 6 crosses were complete. Part 10. The final click in the silence of Lefortovo, the investigation into the case of Margarita Volskaya lasted 19 months. For most of that time, she was held in a special-purpose isolation cell in the basement of Lefortovo prison. It was a place that officially did not exist, a room with walls padded with thick wool-to-swallow screams, and a single, high-wattage bulb that burned 24 hours a day, designed to dissolve the boundaries between day and night, reality and nightmare. Investigator Lev Gromov aged a decade during those months. He visited her every day. He tried everything. Persuasion, threats, promises of a comfortable life in a psychiatric clinic, and finally, the chemical arts of the KGB. They injected her with SP-117, a truth serum designed to strip away the will. Under the influence of the drugs, Margarita sang. She sang the lullabies her mother had sung in the house on the embankment. She recited the forbidden poetry of Gumilev. She spoke to the ghosts of her father and mother as if they were standing in the corner of the cell. "Hello, Papa," she would whisper, her eyes vacant and dilated. "I've cleared the path. They won't come for us anymore." But she never uttered a single digit of the code. The psychiatric experts of the KGB were baffled. Their report stated, "The subject has an impenetrable psychological block. The drive for vengeance is more powerful than the instinct for self-preservation. The information regarding the secret accounts has been integrated into her persona as a symbol of her final victory. To speak the numbers would be to lose her soul." Gromov was in a state of quiet, simmering fury. He realized that even in chains, she was the one in control. As long as she remained silent, the billions of rubles stolen by the party elite remained a dead weight in a Swiss vault, untouchable by Khrushchev, Brezhnev, or the state. In August 1979, the patience of the system finally evaporated. An unprecedented decision was made. A closed military tribunal was convened. The charges were a laundry list of Soviet nightmares: high treason, terrorism, large-scale embezzlement, and espionage for a foreign power. The espionage charge was a complete fabrication, added only to justify the maximum penalty. The sentence was written before the trial even began. Death by shooting. No right of appeal. Immediate execution. We return to the corridor where our story began. Margarita walked toward the execution room with the same regal grace she had displayed at the card tables of Tbilisi. Gromov had granted her one final request. She was allowed to wear her own clothes. She chose the black silk dress she had worn at Givers Villa, her mother's pearls still clasped around her neck. She entered the basement room. The floor was covered in sawdust to soak up the mess. The wall was pitted with the impacts of previous final hours. 3 executioners stood ready, their faces hidden by shadows. Gromov stood in the center, required by protocol to witness the end of his masterpiece. He stepped toward her one last time. "Margot," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's not too late. Give me the code. I can stop them. I can get you out. On my honor as an officer." Margarita looked at him and smiled, a smile of such profound, triumphant beauty that Gromov flinched as if struck. "Your honor died in that hospital room, Lev," she said. "And the code. You want the key to your master's gold?" She leaned in, her lips touching his ear. Gromov held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The code," she whispered, "is 1917. The year you killed my country. Search the wind, Major. The gold stays where it is. It is my last gift to you. You will know it exists, but you will never touch it. Live with that greed until it chokes you." Gromov recoiled, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. She had played him to the very end. "Fire!" he screamed, his voice a ragged howl. The volley of 3 rifles erupted in the confined space. Margarita's body jerked as if hit by a lightning bolt and slid slowly down the wall. 3 crimson flowers bloomed across the black silk of her dress. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the ceiling with an expression of absolute, unshakable peace. The Black Widow of the Central Committee was gone. Officially, the body of Margarita Volskaya was cremated that same night in the Donskoy crematorium. Her ashes were dumped into a common pit for unclaimed remains. Every mention of her name was purged from the archives of the Zags and the militia. Investigator Gromov retired a year later, a broken man who drank himself to death in the mid-1980s in an apartment filled with the charred remains of his own memoirs. But the story does not end with a bullet. In 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed and the KGB archives were partially pried open, researchers found a strange folder titled Operation Widow. It contained no names, only reports of missing gold. And in 1993, a small note appeared in the Swiss financial press. Bank Iwen in Zurich reported that a dormant vault, No. 404, unclaimed since 1957, was opened following a legal inquiry. The vault was found to be empty. Who emptied it, and when? In the bank's visitor log for 1980, 1 year after the official execution of Margarita Volskaya, there was a signature, M. Volskaya. Handwriting analysis conducted by enthusiasts years later showed a 95% match with the original Margarita. Was the execution a staged performance? Did Gromov, in a final act of twisted love or desperate greed, save her in exchange for half the fortune? Or did she possess a power the state could not understand? The official history says she is dead. But legends have a way of outliving empires. They say that in the 1990s, in a quiet cafe in Paris, an elderly but strikingly beautiful lady was often seen wearing a string of pearls with a gold rose clasp. She never spoke Russian, but whenever the news from Moscow played on the television, she would turn off the sound and smile her mysterious, honey-colored smile. Margarita Volskaya, the woman who declared war on a system and won, even if she had to die to do it. She proved that one human being, driven by a great hatred and a greater love for the memory of her ancestors, could bring an empire to its knees. Her vengeance was terrifying, her methods were cruel, but in the silence of the archives, one truth remains. For the monsters she destroyed, her cruelty was the only justice they deserved.